There is a story that one day, Genghis Khan disappeared onto the peak of a sacred mountain. When he returned, he made a grand proclamation. The god of the sky had granted him the joyous news of the conquest of China. But there was a massive problem. The Chinese possessed gunpowder, the most dangerous weapon of that era. How did Genghis Khan, sitting on the bare backs of horses, face guns and explosive shells? And most importantly, why did he feel the need to challenge an empire as magnificent and powerful as China in the first place? I am your host, and in this second-to-last episode of the mini-series, Who Was Genghis Khan? On Mystery in the Dark, we will show you exactly that. During the era of Genghis Khan, China was ruled by powerful dynasties, the most formidable being the Jin Dynasty. They were also known as the Great Jin. Their rulers worshipped the sky as God and called themselves the Sons of Heaven. On the other side, Genghis Khan made the same claim, that he was the chosen son of the eternal blue sky, and that the sovereignty of the entire world had been placed in his lap. This ideological clash was the primary reason for their confrontation. However, another major cause of conflict was the constant friction along their borders. Since the Chinese Empire was more powerful, the aggression often started from their side. Soldiers of the Jin Empire would frequently raid Mongol territories, looting their wealth, dishonoring their families, and kidnapping Mongol children to be sold into slavery. In response, Mongol and Tartar warbands would also carry out raids in Chinese territories. This cycle of violence had become a routine part of life. Eventually, a new emperor ascended the Jin throne. He was unwilling to give the Mongols any more importance than that of mere nomadic wanderers. He sent a message to Genghis Khan demanding that he accept the suzerainty of the Chinese emperor. Genghis Khan listened to the message, turned toward the direction of China, and spat on the ground with great force. He then jumped onto his horse and rode away. This single act was his silent but clear declaration of war against the Jin Empire. In the year 1211, he gathered his tribes for this purpose. Men, women, and children divided into separate groups to pray to the god of the sky for victory. But Genghis Khan was not among those praying in the camp. Where was he? He had traveled to the beautiful and high peak of Burkhan Khaldun, located in what is now Mongolia's Gorky Terel National Park. The Mongols considered this mountain sacred. Genghis Khan stayed on this peak for 3 to 4 days. When he descended, his face was filled with absolute determination. He told his army, "Rejoice, rejoice! The blue sky has promised us victory." Hearing this news, the Mongols were filled with a fierce new spirit. The Chinese population was massive, and their army was equally large and far more modern than the Mongols. Genghis Khan, like a seasoned general, understood that passion alone would not defeat the Chinese. Therefore, he played a deep strategic move. He divided the Chinese army into 2 parts. He did this by exploiting the rebellious sentiments in Manchuria, an important region of the Jin Empire. Genghis Khan incited a revolt there. Naturally, a large portion of the Chinese army was sent to Manchuria to crush the rebellion, leaving the central regions with fewer troops. It was during this time, in May 1211, that Genghis Khan launched his invasion of the Jin Empire. He initially had an army of 65,000. This force crossed the 1,000-kilometer-long Gobi Desert in just 1 month and entered northern China. Genghis Khan was confident of victory, but contrary to his hopes, he initially failed. Despite having fewer troops, the Chinese successfully defended themselves. The reason was that Genghis Khan's homework was incomplete. He was an expert in open-field combat, But the way the Chinese had fortified their cities into invincible fortresses was entirely new to him. He lacked catapults to break strong walls or specialized equipment to tear down massive gates. This caused every siege to take much longer than expected. Furthermore, the winter season began. Amidst the falling snow, forget fighting. Even camping in a foreign land became impossible. Thus, Genghis Khan returned not with victory, but with a valuable experience. Learning from his failed attack, he prepared again. In 1213, Genghis Khan invaded the Jin Empire once more. This time he was better prepared. His army was larger, and the pace of his conquests was lightning fast. He captured region after region as he advanced toward the Jin capital, Zhongdu. This city was located exactly where modern-day Beijing stands. The Jin Empire was resisting, but the truth was that they lacked the trained soldiers and resources to match such a massive Mongol horde. To fill this gap, Chinese commanders began recruiting poor farmers. These farmers were made part of the infantry, supported by cavalry units of trained soldiers. The Chinese formation in the field placed the peasant infantry in the center, with trained cavalry standing in ranks on the left and right. Genghis Khan observed this. He found a brilliant solution. When the battle began, Mongol archers rained arrows on the peasant infantry, forcing them to retreat in panic. This left only the cavalry units on the flanks. While the arrows were falling, Mongol horsemen would ride behind the hills, circle around, and attack the enemy cavalry from the rear. Trapped in a pincer movement, the Chinese cavalry was annihilated. Similarly, Genghis Khan found a clever trick for capturing fortresses. His soldiers would first surround a Chinese fort. After some time, they would leave their supplies and pretend to retreat in a hurry. Seeing the Mongols fleeing, the Chinese soldiers would open the gates to loot the abandoned supplies or pursue the enemy. The Mongol army was always prepared for this. Their hidden units and the fleeing force would turn back and strike. This tactic gave the Chinese no time to even close the gates, allowing the Mongols to conquer fortress after fortress. At this point, a question must arise in your mind. China had built the magnificent Great Wall, and its main purpose was to stop invaders. So, how did Genghis Khan cross this obstacle? History provides two versions. One is that he bypassed the wall by finding a different route. It is also rumored that the Jin army guarding the area was a mercenary force, which Genghis Khan easily bribed or won over. Other hypotheses exist as well. However, there is a second, more rational version, that during Genghis Khan's era, the Great Wall was not yet so massive or continuous that it was impossible to cross. Therefore, with a bit of strategy, Genghis Khan was able to cross it. After capturing fortress after fortress, he reached the heart of the Jin Empire, Beijing. What he saw there was enough to blow his mind. Genghis Khan was used to living among rivers, tents, mountains, and small temporary towns. He had seen other Chinese cities on the way, but they weren't particularly large. When he approached a magnificent global city like Beijing, the sight was like something out of a fairy tale. Before him lay a vast metropolis stretching for miles. He saw the silhouettes of massive buildings from afar. He was lost in wonder and thought because the city was as secure as it was large. The security was top-notch. The city was surrounded by walls 30 miles long and 40 feet high. There were 900 towers on these walls where archers kept watch. There were 12 main gates. On 3 sides, the city was surrounded by a moat filled with water. Interestingly, 4 smaller cities had been built outside the capital for its protection. These 4 also had strong walls and moats, and they were connected to the capital via underground tunnels. Each of these satellite cities housed 4,000 soldiers, while 20,000 to 24,000 troops remained alert inside the capital. The total protective force reached 40,000, which could suddenly be increased to 400,000 because the entire population could be drafted into battle. For a nomadic army, Beijing was almost invincible. Genghis Khan realized he couldn't conquer this city through a direct assault. He decided to put the emperor under pressure by keeping the city under a continuous siege to cut off all supplies. He stationed 5,000 soldiers to block all roads leading to the city and sent an ambassador offering peace in exchange for certain conditions. However, the emperor was very proud of his defense system and rejected the offer, believing Genghis Khan would eventually be forced to leave empty-handed by the harsh weather. But he was unaware of a conspiracy. One of his governors, Qi Cheng, was dreaming of seizing the throne. He avoided the Mongol soldiers and reached the gates of Beijing, shouting that the Mongols were after him. The guards opened the gates, but once inside, Qi Cheng launched an attack on the royal palace. The emperor and his guards could not withstand the sudden strike, and the Golden Khan, as the Mongols called the emperor, was killed. Qi Cheng chose to be a kingmaker rather than the king, placing a weak member of the Jin family on the throne while he became the supreme commander. The only benefit Genghis Khan got from this was that Qi Cheng fell ill shortly after taking command. Even while ill, Qi Cheng led the army from a cart and pushed the Mongols back for 2 days. But his health worsened, and on the third day, he sent a commander named Cao to face the Mongols, threatening to behead him if he returned defeated. Cao went to the battlefield with the fear of death, and he lost. To avoid being executed by his boss, Cao secretly entered the city with his loyalists and beheaded Qi Cheng instead. News of Qi Cheng's death sparked a civil war inside Beijing. For 2 days, the two groups fought and bled each other out. Eventually, the puppet emperor intervened and brokered a peace. Cao was made the new supreme commander, but the city's condition was deteriorating. Due to the siege, food was running out. Genghis Khan then made a major decision. Leaving 5,000 troops to guard the blockades, he sent the rest of his army in small groups to loot other cities of the Jin Empire. The goal was to break the emperor's spirit with news of destruction elsewhere and to gather rations for the Mongol army. To capture these new cities, the Mongols changed their tactics. The fleeing trick no longer worked as Chinese soldiers now understood it. So the Mongols began capturing Chinese villagers and using them as human shields to break the gates. Often, the guards on the walls would recognize their own people and hesitate to attack. This tactic was very successful, and the Mongols looted city after city, taking slaves and burning crops. The Jin emperor could no longer watch his empire burn. Lacking the courage to fight, he requested peace. In early 1214, a treaty was signed. According to the terms, the emperor's daughter was to marry Genghis Khan. The Jin Empire was also bound to pay 3,000 horses, 100,000 gold plates, and 300,000 yards of silk. Genghis Khan loosened the siege and opened a few roads. However, the Chinese emperor made a fatal mistake. Seeing the siege relax, he fled Beijing and hid in the southern city of Kaifeng. This city was even more secure, with a wall 120 miles long. When Genghis Khan heard of the flight, he was furious. He declared it a violation of the treaty and ordered a total and brutal siege of Beijing. This time, the blockade was so tight that food completely vanished. People began eating their own dead. Generals began deserting the city under the cover of night, some even joining the Mongols just to get a meal. In these desperate times, the defenders tried one last weapon, a weapon that no one else in the world likely had: gunpowder. Yes, by 1215, the Chinese had developed gunpowder and were using early versions of cannons and guns. Luckily for Genghis Khan, these weapons were in their early stages and were not mature. Their aim was poor, and they didn't cause enough destruction to force the enemy back. The defenders fired shells and bullets at the Mongols, but they soon ran out of gunpowder. They even began melting gold and silver to make projectiles. But none of this worked. By June 1st, 1215, after nearly a year and a half of siege, the guards opened the gates and invited a violent storm inside. When the Mongol army entered the city, no house remained safe, and no human was spared. 60,000 girls committed suicide to escape the Mongols. The Mongols burned all places of worship, destroyed the gates, and set entire neighborhoods on fire. The number of people killed in and around Beijing is still unknown, but estimates reach into the hundreds of thousands. They built towers of skulls and corpses. It is said there were so many bodies that the fat from the decomposing corpses spread through the streets, making them slippery. At the time of Beijing's fall, Genghis Khan was 361 kilometers away in Dolan Nor. In 1216, he returned to Mongolia with treasures of gold, silver, precious stones, and silk. When thousands of carts arrived in Mongolia, the people were speechless with wonder. Some items had colors the Mongols had never seen before. Thousands of doctors, artists, and skilled workers were brought as slaves, and they introduced the Mongols to art, culture, and modern civilization. Genghis Khan had spent 5 years in China and had devastated the capital of the very empire that had once treated him as a minor commander. Beijing's ruin marked the beginning of the end for the Jin Empire. Although it lasted another 20 years, its back was broken. Genghis Khan also subdued the Western Xia and the Uyghur Kingdom. The Uyghur king showed wisdom by surrendering without a fight. The Uyghurs and Chinese joined the Mongol army in large numbers, teaching them how to build catapults and modern war engines. Mongol power grew even further in 1218 when they conquered the Kara Khitan Khanate. The Turkic Muslims living there, tired of oppression, joined Genghis Khan, viewing him as a savior. While Genghis Khan did not live to rule all of China, his grandson Kublai Khan eventually completed the conquest. However, during his own life, Genghis Khan went on to annihilate a massive and powerful Islamic empire. Which empire was that? Why did he attack a powerful Muslim state? Why could the Muslims not resist despite their large numbers? Who was the one general who remained a headache for Genghis Khan for years? And why, despite all efforts, has Genghis Khan's grave never been found? We will show you all this in the next and final episode of Who Was Genghis Khan? In the meantime, tell us in the comments, were your sympathies with the besieged Chinese citizens or with Genghis Khan's army?